Welcome everybody, and welcome to the Pirate Racing Club podcast, the first episode. Today we have Ed Spencer with us. Ed Spencer is a British journalist, motorsport journalist. Hi Ed.
Hi, Florian.
So tell us more about what you actually do and who you are.
Okay, so I am Ed Spencer. I am the F1 correspondent for Total Motorsport, and I attend the odd Grand Prix there and then. But I'm also a motorsport fan first, and I'm a frequent watcher of MotoGP, Formula 2, Formula 3, and most importantly, sports cars. And very excited for the new era of Hypercar and LDMH.
And today we are gonna talk indeed about the new Hyperclass, the LMDH, even the new GT regulations, because they are new GTs. Basically, the reforming of the whole sport since it happened, and also about the 24 hours of Daytona that just happened this past weekend. What actually is the Hyperclass?
So the Hyperclass is the fastest class in sports car racing, and these are the prototype cars, and they're the fastest in the whole series. And it is basically the successor to the LMP1 category, which went on from 2004 till 2020, which then it also replaced the LMP900 class. And it's been around for 2 years, and the originators, of course, were Toyota, Glickenhaus, Alpine, and last year we had Peugeot come along before the smorgasbord of manufacturers turned up. There's two different types of car. You can have like an electric and fuel, and it also means you can compete in IMSA as well, the American equivalent of the World Endurance Championship. So the LMDH is Le Mans Hypercar, which is introduced in 2021. That can only compete in WEC. The LDMH car, which is the Le Mans Daytona Hypercar, which was introduced last year, is for WEC and IMSA. So that means that if you have a car that can compete in both, you can run in Daytona and at Le Mans. And this hasn't been really achieved since the mid to late 90s. The regulations really leave a big room for variety of design. Brings a lot of different cars, different engine specifications, different types of budget. You can have the mighty Ferrari and Porsche turning up to the little garagistas of Glickenhaus and Van Wall, all competing on one circuit.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting that the regulations leave room for the big variety. For example, if you look at how Toyota looks, they are more looking like the previous LMP1s, but then you have Peugeot. They look completely different. They don't even have a back wing. Do you think they will struggle because they don't have a back wing and completely different design than the usual and normal designs?
Well, we haven't seen a car really like this since, I would say, the 70s, when they were completely got rid of the back wing. It will work on high speed circuits, definitely, such as Le Mans. You could maybe even make an argument for Sebring, but they may struggle at circuits like Spa and Portimao, which have a mix of high speed corners and low speed corners. So they may have it tough, but it's definitely a radical design, and it's definitely something worth trying, because as we both said, there's such a variety to the regulations. You can really play with it and experiment with something which you couldn't do with LMP1. So it's worth a go, but they may struggle in the corners in particular.
I guess indeed with the high speed tracks such as Monza 2, they might have a chance to actually be very good. But as you said, like Spa, where there needs a lot of downforce, they will struggle indeed. I think the same about it. So we already talked about which brands are in it in the Hyperclass. So let's talk about who is in for 2023 and where they are in.
So we in Hyperclass WEC, we have Cadillac, who are coming back to Le Mans for the first time in 21 years. Van Wall, an historic name, brought back by the Collars brand. Porsche, well, their record speaks for themselves. They've won Le Mans more time than I've had hot dinners. Toyota, of course, defending champions. Bit of a juggernaut, considering that for years they were almost the bridesmaid and never the bride. Ferrari, back at Le Mans for the first time for 50 years. They've got a new car coming out which looks an absolute stunner, Peugeot as we mentioned, and then of course we have the garagista Glickenhaus, who have been, you know, a perennial player. They've challenged for victories. They've been on the podium at Le Mans, so they're no slouches. But of course, they have a smaller budget compared to your Porsches and your Toyotas. Porsche are also in IMSA, which means that customers can buy a car and run it in Daytona at Le Mans, wherever they feel like it. Cadillac as well are going to be there. Acura, who are basically Honda in the rest of the world, are going to be there. They've had a really successful run in America, particularly in the ALMS. And BMW, who won Le Mans in 1999, they're going to have a crack at IMSA as well, potentially moving to Le Mans in 2024.
Yeah, let's go a bit deeper in the Glickenhaus, because as you said, they are independent. They're not as big as Porsche, and yeah, they have a small budget, as you said. Do you think they have a big problem with that? Do you think they will struggle because of that? Because, for example, last year they didn't compete in several races because their budget wasn't big enough to compete in all of them.
I think it's going to be a challenge for Glickenhaus because of the fact that they're going to be well behind in terms of the development race. They won't have as much time to really evolve this car, and with only one car running, it's going to be mighty difficult. But they've shown in the past that they can punch above their weight, and you know, I don't expect them to be fighting with the LMP2 cars. Far from it. I still expect them to be in the top 10, maybe fighting for a top 6. But I think they're openly realistic. They don't have the budget, and you know, they're going to be playing, I would say, catch up this year.
Hopefully for them they will succeed properly, since it's a beautiful thing in my opinion if you are just a family business and you can compete in the highest level of racing. So after we discussed all of these, who did you think was gonna be strong? Because now we already had the race where we will talk about later on about, but who did you think was gonna be strong with their new hypercars?
I think Toyota obviously have to be the favourites, with the fact that they've won the last 2 championships, and even if they've been pegged back, they've still been very quick. So they're obviously going to be the favourites. You would have to say Cadillac looked very strong. They were very quick at Daytona. They were challenging Acura. They were the only really big challengers to Acura, because Porsche fell away and BMW were using it as a testing session, a glorified testing session. They were very reliable, and that bodes well for the 24 hours of Le Mans. You have to say, considering their fleet of cars, Porsche should be thereabouts. They're going to have 4, 2 factory and then 2 customers, one of them being Giotto and one of them being Proton. You'd have to say maybe Ferrari, depending on how testing goes and where they are in the first race at Sebring. And then in IMSA, well, Acura, of course, are the gold standards. They dominated Daytona. Blomqvist and Delatraz had a real gunslinging match during the race, and I can definitely see them really dominating this series before going to the next level and going to Le Mans in 2024.
Yeah, my opinion about that, about who was gonna be strong, and I thought who was gonna be the leader everywhere. And to be honest, I really thought BMW was gonna be very strong, given the progress they made the past years with their new generation GT cars, for example. So I thought that they would smash the new car too. But apparently, which we saw in the race and which we will discuss further on later, they were actually super far behind. So that's something that surprised me a bit. Who surprised you in the negative way?
Well, I was obviously very surprised by the fact Porsche did have its teething problems. We said before the race that, you know, we expected Porsche to be right up there, and they did have pace, but they were unreliable, which can be fixed in due course. BMW, as you mentioned, I think is a very big concern, their pace, but evidently, as the reason why they're not going to Le Mans is because they want to use this year as a bit of a development year. I have concerns about Peugeot, as I've mentioned, particularly on some circuits, and because they did have some reliability issues when they entered last year, although as it's the first year, there's always going to be teething problems. And I think really Vanwall is a slight concern because you think, when we think of Bicolis, we always think of that team that is there at the start, but it's not necessarily there at the end. And they're going to also be hamstrung with, the lack of budget. Sure, they're going to have a very good driver lineup, with Jack Villeneuve being one of the drivers, but they're going to find it hard to compete with the likes of with the likes of Toyota and Ferrari.
What is actually the story of a Vanwell? Because me personally, at least, I know indeed that Jacques Villeneuve will be the lineup, but for the rest, I actually have no idea about who the team is and where they come from.
So Vanwall was an historic British name in the 1950s and was the first real British marque to really succeed in Grand Prix racing. Bearing in mind, in the 1950s, it was constantly, it was dominated by the Italians and for a brief time the Germans with Mercedes-Benz. Then the brand went south after the late 50s, at the end of the 50s, not long after Sterling Moss had finished second in the World Championship driving one of those cars, and there'd always been talk of trying to revive the brand, maybe try and enter Formula One, but it never really got that far. So then in 2022, 2023, Bicolis, who have entered Le Mans several times with their own car, although never really could compete with your Audis and Porsches of the world. They bought the name, they built a new car. It looked touch and go whether they would enter the series this year because of the massive amounts of entries, and of course there is the issue that there's a big fight for places. But this year they will be back, and the Vanwall project will be run by Colin Collis, who used to have a part in running Force India and Hispania Racing. So a very experienced man who has been around the motorsport industry for years upon years.
Do you also think they have enough budget to actually be in the front of the race, or do you think they are more comparable to Glickenhaus?
Well, Bicol has always had a little bit of pace during the race. This is a different kettle of fish, and I think with Vanwall, it might be a little bit hard. I think they'll be with Glickenhaus, then maybe with Peugeot, or with Cadillac, maybe Porsche on tracks that struggles that. I think the goal of this year will be to find sponsors and then get better and better as the season goes on. The big event for them is the Le Mans 24 Hours. One, if they need to perform well here, because I don't think the ACO will take a very good look to them if, let's say, they're out by hour 1 or hour 2, or they're struggling at the back fighting with the LMP2s.
Is there anyone besides the obvious that you really had doubts for? Maybe you had doubts for Cadillac, maybe you had doubts for Acura.
I didn't really have doubts for Cadillac and Acura because I know they've been around the block, they've done IMSA. But Cadillac, I was surprised by Cadillac's relative lack of qualifying pace. They were a little bit behind Porsche, and of course they had to wait for the retirement of the Porsche to really move up the pack. But once they got into the swing of the race, they were very competitive, and that's why those doubts over whether Cadillac can really go on and do well in both series have melted away.
Yeah, for me, I thought that Acura might have been a struggle, but they were actually, as we saw, very dominant. So again, my prospects were just all out of the window. What about the non-participating brands? Aston Martin, Lamborghini, Isotta Francini Milano? Because the last one, the Isotta Francini, they were actually planning to participate in WEC, but eventually weren't on the entry list.
I think it was going to be tight for Isotta to come in because of the demand, obviously, and the fact that they didn't. I don't think they really had a car ready in time. So it would have been touch and go whether they would have even got to Le Mans and been ready. So I think they had taken a wise approach by saying, look, we will enter later on in the season and then just go step by step before tackling the series full time in 2024. Lamborghini, of course, they will be there in 2024 as well, and they have already signed Romain Grosjean to Formula One, a very recognisable name to Formula One fans. Aston Martin sadly didn't enter. They were expected to enter, but they pulled the project to really focus on Formula One, and that has caused some consternation among some of the sports cars because the Aston Martin project did look very good before it inevitably got canned. Also, Audi was supposed to join, but they have also decided to go to Formula One.
Talking about Aston Martin, indeed, they made a Valkyrie, I think was the name of their hypercar, and it also looked very promising and strong. So it's actually very sad that they pulled the plug, because if they would invest in it, I'm sure they would be very competitive with that car.
Great. I think they would have been thereabouts.
Yeah, exactly. And Lamborghini, I think they were gonna compete together with Iron Lynx with their hypercars. Then let's talk about the GTs, because there are still a lot of new GT cars and new generations of cars from the brands this year. So can you tell us a bit more about the GTs?
So GT cars are Grand Tourers, supercars on steroids, as they've been called. They are the slowest category in endurance racing, but it's a car you can buy off the shelf. Sorry, well, when I say buy off the shelf, I mean you can buy them in the showroom,
Yeah.
and then tune them up to become full-blooded racers. And there's a real variety. Ferrari are going to be here in the series as well. There's going to be Porsche, who have dominated. Those two have long battled for supremacy in that category. Lamborghini, Mercedes are thereabouts. Corvette have been mainstays. Aston Martin still have some involvement with the Vantage. BMW were thereabouts. So it's really a series where you can, enter without, chucking in millions and millions of pounds or euros into running a two-car team. This is also a category that's on the reform, I would say, because we have the GTE cars, which are basically GT Pro, which is in its last year before transitioning to GT3, which is now the common form of GT racing, and they have blank power for several years, and now they're going to go straight to the on. There's two types of GT cars. There's GT Pro, which is pro teams with factory drivers, and then there's GT Am, which is a lineup with a couple of pro drivers, and then also a bronze driver who pay drive. And this can be really anyone, to pick from, let's say, rich playboys who are very quick behind the wheel, to your average property developer who's got a racing license from a school somewhere. And then, the drivers' ages do depend from your 20-somethings to even 60-something. So it's really offering that promise to drivers who wouldn't normally get a chance. IMSA has GT and GT Pro. That includes GT3 cars. That's why you saw Lexus compete alongside your Corvettes. And of course, we will see the transition, so that will stay as it is. Ferrari, Porsche, Lamborghini, Corvette will all be there in 2024. Mercedes is going to be there 2025.
It's interesting that they all have a different year that they want to start competing with those new cars. Do you think it will give a difference in terms of competitiveness between the different brands? For example, the brands that came in soon will be ahead of the ones, for example, like Mercedes coming in 2025?
I think the ones who have got a year under the belt will be stronger, definitely. I think, when you look at the teams listed, they're all experienced. So this should be a walk in the park for them. Mercedes obviously going to wait another year after that so they can really assess the competition. I think the only real major difference we'll see from these categories is that the cars will be a little bit less powerful and lap times will be slower, which means that the hypercars will lap them quicker. But I expect it will be fairly close in qualifying. Maybe we will see a small gap between your Ferrari and Porsche and your Corvettes to your Lamborghinis and your Mercedes.
Let's talk about a bit more about the bronze drivers, for example. Every driver gets the FIA grading. It works with different points they earn during the different seasons they participate, so they can go from bronze to silver to gold to platinum. Do you think a 60-year-old can still work himself up to silver or even gold?
Maybe, but they have to put in the work and they have to be quick. As we know, there have been drivers who have come to Le Mans who have been bronze, silver, amateurs, and they made a right pig's ear of qualifying, and they've been told you can't race. So they need to up their game, up their workload, get more testing time done if they want to progress. It's also, we should add as well, this amateur system of the bronze, silver and gold has also been added to LMP2, which is why you see an additional LMP2 category. I think with the right setup and with the right environment around them, yes, of course, but it's quite a big mountain to climb.
A great example of these, why I'm taking this as a topic, is, for example, Michael Fassbender, the actor. As a lot of people know, he started racing too, together with Porsche. They even made a whole YouTube series about it, so for whoever didn't see it, they can find it with Road to Le Mans on YouTube. So he was first also very slow, and he had to learn a lot, but as you said, with putting in the testing days and all the efforts and money, he eventually was competitive, and even with the top of the bronze drivers, and they also competed in Le Mans the past year. So maybe he can go to a silver grading, and then he can really say he's a proper racing driver, as he always wanted to be as a kid. Okay, so let's talk about the Rolex 24 hours at Daytona. So what were the qualifying results, let's say, to have an idea who was quick already the week before the big race, since they qualify a week ahead of the race?
So the field was relatively close. The top 9 was separated by a second, which is mighty close in sports car racing and in racing in general. Acura snatched pole, the number 60, driven by Tom Blomqvist, who put in a mighty final run to just deny the number 7 Porsche. The Wayne Taylor Acura, number 10, was a tenth down in third. Then the first of the Cadillacs, 01, leading 02, and the 31, which is the Durrani car. Then BMW slightly behind, 6 tenths down. The 24 leading the 25. And then the Porsche number 6, which was on course for, I believe, 5th or 6th on the grid, made a mistake at the bus stop. Nick Tandy slammed it into the barrier and his time got deleted, which meant he had to start from 9th on the grid. So it was a fairly close opening qualifying session. There was no one really having a massive advantage, but Acura, of course, were the front runners.
Yeah, during that qualifying result, especially if you see the results after it, that everyone was between the second, as you just said, then you really had an idea of, oh, everyone is going to be very competitive with each other, and it will be just super tight all race long. But eventually that didn't happen. If you can talk us a bit through the race, then we will learn what exactly happened and why we are seeing this.
So when the green flag drops, it became more stagnant. So Acura really pushed on the opening stint. Blomqvist in the 60 had a great opening stint, and also the 10 car moved up through the pack as well, whilst Porsche and Cadillac settled down into a bit of a rhythm. Things not so good at BMW. The 25 car was in the pits after 4 hours with a hybrid issue. They lost over 100 laps, and there was basically no chance of getting even a top 10. So they were just doing the miles, really, to understand what they need to work on for Sebring in a few weeks' time. Then it just became a battle between Porsche, Acura and Cadillac. They shared the lead a lot. The 6 to 7 car led, so one of the factory cars led for a bit of time. Cadillac were also in the lead for a bit of time. Louis Delatraz pulled off some mighty moves in the infield. And then Porsche number 7 had a problem. They had an issue. Really lost a chance of getting a top 10. The 10 Acura also had an issue. But in the night, Porsche were leading the race before the Cadillacs. Then Cadillac fought with Porsche. Then the 31 Durrani car had a gearbox problem. And in which case it became a 2-horse race between Cadillac and Acura. Until Cadillac started to fall away, Acura started to get back into the lead. Whilst Porsche had the 6 car had a problem. They blew the gearbox. And I believe they also retired the 6 car as well. 7 struggled on to the end, and the last couple of hours were really a safety car fest. There was a number of cars stopping with punctures, technical issues, but no one was going to stop the Acura of Blomqvist, Castro Neves, Pagano and Brown, who took a convincing victory ahead of the 10 car and the 01 Cadillac. But the real attention after the race was the finish of the LMP2 race.
Yeah, definitely.
Near the end, James Allen just defeated Ben Hanley by 0.016 seconds to win the MP2 class from Ben Hanley. And that is such a fine line of racing in this endurance, that the race can be decided on the final corner of the final lap of the race.
Yeah, even after 24 hours racing, it's just crazy thing, and that's why we love sports cars.
Exactly.
The number 6 didn't retire, by the way. They ended up 8th eventually. So I will take us through the results for a second. The Acura 60 was just on another level in day 1. The Acura number 10 was second. Then all the 3 Cadillacs. Then BMW number 24. Then we had a bit of a gap with all the Porsches and the last BMW, because after all the problems they were just shifted between all the LMPs and even GT cars. So the BMW 25 also finished very, very much behind. Then the results for the GT cars, Mercedes, Corvette and Lexus were 1, 2, 3. So the Mercedes, the Corvette and the Lexus, they were super quick compared to the rest. Do you think there is a problem with the new generation cars that the brands came up with, and might this become a struggle?
It will be a little bit of a struggle for them, yes, but I think it's the nature of the beast. We know GTE is going to be phased out at the end of the year, so why really pour all this money into a category which is going to be phased out? So it's going to be... It's no surprise that GT3 cars are leading the category. After all, manufacturers are going to pour more money into them, so not really a surprise to me.
So going back to the hypercars, it looked like they didn't have much trouble with following each other. I heard some say that only in the last part of the braking part they lose a bit of downforce, but this also means that they can have a very close racing, since they can stay close behind each other.
Yeah, the racing was definitely closer than what many people were expecting. Bearing in mind, these cars are still very wide, and yet they were racing them like Formula 3 cars. Some of the moves they were pulling, that you would not have done that in the old Daytona prototypes. If you had, you would have been considered in that case. But yeah, the racing I thought was excellent. It was almost very unlike endurance racing, because you always have the start of the race where there's a lot of action, then you get to a midpoint where everyone's settling down, getting into their rhythm, dodging the traffic. But even in the mid part of the race, they were going at it like a Grand Prix. It was incredible, and if that's going to be the case for 24 hours, imagine what we're going to get for 6-hour races. It's going to be completely nuts.
Yeah, then they can go really full gas instead of trying to preserve their cars.
Exactly.
So we also saw that the Iron Lynx car, especially the Iron Dames car, for the people that don't know the Iron Dames, they are a project of Iron Lynx with a full female lineup. And their car, they were a lot of times in the garage with electrical problems. Um, they just changed brands from Ferrari to Lamborghini. Do you think it's because they changed brands that they have these problems, or do you think there's something deeper that is really a problem that can possibly just ruin their whole year and maybe coming years?
I think what we got to realise is that this is a learning race. So this is the first race of the year, so you're always going to find those little technical gremlins you need to ease out before we get into the big bulk of the season, which is from March onwards. So I don't think it's really a brand issue. I just think, of course, it's the team learning about a new car, and you're bound to get the odd issue there and then. But of course, I think there's still plenty of time to fix those issues, and I don't see them struggling throughout the season.
What do you expect with the progress of each team? Who will fix their problems easy? Who won't fix their problems easily?
Porsche, I definitely think, will fix their issues. Mainly because there is more pressure on them. They've got customers. They've got customer cars, and if they've got the same issue, the customers are going to be very disappointed, and maybe in 2025, 26 looking around for a new manufacturer, particularly if, let's say, like the likes of Acura decide, okay, we will go to Le Mans and run as Honda. BMW, of course, not only were they struggling with reliability, they were struggling with speed as well. So that's going to be there's going to be a lot of thinking going on back at Rahul Letterman, wondering how do we fix this issue so we can actually fight. Because, of course, they were not massively slow. They weren't a second or two down, but they were still quite a distance away from the other three manufacturers. So they will have a lot of thinking time. Maybe a slight concern for Cadillac, considering they did have some issues, but I don't think they have a great deal to worry about.
Yeah, we also saw that the Acura during the pit stops, sometimes they took the back off of the car and then they pumped some liquid through the back in the car. It was possibly the gearbox, but maybe it was something else. I don't know the details about it. But do you think this might become a problem for them? That now they are quick, of course, and they manage to finish the race. Do you think this, if they don't tackle this problem, that it might be hurtful for them in the long run of the season?
Yes and no. I think yes, because any issue in endurance racing is going to be tough, and they luckily had 24 hours to catch that time up. 6 hours, you have very little time. You have to sort it quickly before that window of class victory goes out the window. But no, I think what the good thing for Acura was it was one of those cars which ran pretty smoothly, apart from, of course, the gearbox issues. And once they got on top of it, it was running bulletproof. So I don't really see that big of an issue, but I think it is something to keep an eye on, because you can't have gearbox issues going on you during a 6-hour race, or even a sprint, which is Long Beach, which will be the Long Beach race, because that's basically a killer. Your race is pretty much done.
Yeah, if you look at BMW, for example, with their number 25, they broke down even before an hour into the race, so it took a long time, like, what was it, 2-3 hours to fix a problem?
Yeah.
So if you have that during a 6-hour race or even a 4-hour race, it's just, you can just pack up and go home.
Pretty much.
So the things you learned from the 24 hours of Daytona, Acura is probably the quickest, especially because the restarts, they just fly away from the people behind them, even from the Bertin car. But Cadillac is very close in terms of the pace, and I think Cadillac is a bit more reliable. So although Acura won, I would put my money on Cadillac in the long run. And of course, BMW and Porsche, they have a lot of catching up to do.
I think for me, Acura are strongest pace-wise, but Cadillac are not a million miles away behind. I'd say they're in a quite close second. They have the reliability, which you've mentioned. Porsche do have the pace. Let's be honest. Second, they were looking good for second and third on the grid, but of course, race-wise, they had that issue, particularly with the reliability, and that's what cost them. BMW, of course, has a lot of work to do. So, really, we are seeing the IMSA side of it being. We can already see how the season is going to unfold, in that the number 10, 60 cars are going to be fighting with the 01, 02, and the 31, and then if Porsche somehow makes some progress, it could be a 6-7 way scrap. BMW, unfortunately, unless something magical happens, this is going to be a learning year for them.
Okay, then I think we went through everything we could go through. Now the season started, and we have a lot of things to look forward to. It will be a very exciting year, a new era, a golden era, and let's see what the season will bring for both in the IMSA wise and WEC wise. Thank you, Ed, for joining.
Pleasure.
And let's catch up with you soon in another episode. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Ed Spencer. If you want to follow him on Twitter, you can do that at Spencer99. You can also follow him on Instagram at _Spencer99. If you want to catch up with all the latest news around pirate racing, you can follow us on Twitter at PirateRacingDAO.